Well, welcome everybody. My name is Rod Starkey, and I'm a Principal Solutions Engineer here at Oracle. I've been working with PeopleSoft applications for about 20 years now as a customer, as well as 13 years here at Oracle, and I am part of North American Applications. So today, we are going to be looking at PeopleSoft Services Procurement, and primarily it's used for hiring and managing contract labor. Before we get going, I do have to mention our safe harbor statement that if I talk about any future functionality, it can't be incorporated into any contract, etc. But I hope you take reassurance in that because Oracle is still investing into PeopleSoft heavily. So as far as the agenda for today, I'm going to give you an overview of services procurement in PowerPoint, and then we'll get into a demonstration of a service request, onboarding, management, settlement, and inquiry. And I'm going to be using a UPK vignette to walk through it so you don't have to struggle watching my navigation. But it's against a version 9.2 image 26 environment. You could certainly just advance this recording if you want to get right to the demo, but I encourage you to hang on for a few minutes going through the PowerPoint and seeing some of the elements of services procurement. So when it comes to requesting services, whether they're goods or services, flat fee, etc., we do have our e-procurement module. It's really self-service focused and works with catalogs, things like that. Then you've got the core purchasing module, and that's for more of the heavy lifting activities that your buyers do, contracts, rebates, things like that. Well, we've introduced, or PeopleSoft introduced services procurement to pull the contract labor notion out of HCM and instead include it with the financials and supply chain database solution so you can include all of those activities with your procurement spend. And you can use, there's skills-based job templates. It's all about onboarding and offboarding and during the management. There's time and expense tracking, things like that, and it's all integrated with the system as we'll see. So really, the idea with services procurement is we're going to work with those service suppliers. And a service supplier example might be like Manpower or Robert Half, etc. Your requesters would initiate a service order. You know, what kind of a person or consultant are they looking to bring in? Your procurement team is going to work with the appropriate service suppliers to find out who they want to get the contract labor from. Then you can manage those resources as they're onboarded and as they work against your projects. And then there's the financial settlement that you can do your invoicing as well. Now, there's lots of integrations that go on from supplier relationship management. There's integrations with e-procurement, and they leverage some strategic sourcing. They share some components for analysis. There's purchasing. Also, there's with our ESA, Enterprise Service Automation area. We've got integration with project costing to collect time with, and then resource management. And resource management is there for you to look for skilled labor that is part of your existing employee base. And if you can't find someone, you can initiate a request over in services procurement to bring those people on. And then, of course, there's the financial section because that's how we're going to do our billing. And then there's also some HCM integration to bring in things like the organizational hierarchy, whether it's the person information, etc. Now, one thing to remember as we go through this is that the center, once you've onboarded someone in services procurement, the center of the universe is the work order, because the work order is going to keep track of the original request. It's going to keep track of your timesheets, how you're doing your distributions, how who the service provider is, what kind of timesheet they're going to be filling out, and then track consumption. And it's going to collect that information. It's even reaching into purchasing. So if you want to generate a corresponding purchase order, you can do that. E-procurement can help issue that requisition to do the sourcing and then generate your work order. Project costing is part of the equation there as well, because you can do rebilling if you want to. And then as your timesheets come in and get approved, they go over to accounts payable for voucher payment, that kind of thing. So in our general, this is kind of a busy slide, but in our general process flow, we've got this little roadmap up here where we're going from the request to actually sourcing out the individual. We're going to onboard and purchase their services, and then we're going to manage what they do. And then as we manage that, they're going to be issuing timesheets or deliverables that we're going to generate a voucher and a payment for. And all the while, we're going to be collecting data that we can analyze them down, as we move along. So take a look at all these stacked chevrons because they're going to take us through some of the other elements that we have here. So if we follow our first chevron, we're going to be looking at, what does it start out at? So it starts out with a service requisition. It doesn't always have to. You can just create a new work order directly, but a requisition can come from different areas, different lines of business. And that integration, this is actually part of the e-procurement component to have your requisition here. And this little area in the center, we can see as services procurement, we can request a resource-based effort or deliverables where they're doing things by milestone and activities. And you can even do multi-resource. So if you've got more than one consultant or person that you're looking for that's going to work against a particular job, you can do that. Now, as far as the requisitioning, you can do things like you can identify what are the competencies that you're looking for. For example, in this regard, we're looking for somebody that can do programming, who knows DB2, who knows Oracle databases, let's say, what their experience and descriptions are. And then we can even identify things like we want to allow expenses to be included and captured when they fill out their timesheets. Are we going to let them, is travel required? Are we going to let them do telecommuting? Is an interview required? Because you can have interview workflow to bring people in when they submit their resumes. You can route that through different people to review it and then give a rating. Now, as far as the requesting is concerned, you can still, we'll go back, we can see the different requisition life cycle. Okay, where is our requisition? And in this particular case, we can see one was fulfilled. You could run the requisition through approvals. It was sourced, and then a work order was actually generated, and then you can drill into what the progress log was and any expenses. So you've got that, that unified integration to go through and look at all the transactions that have conspired with that particular effort. Now, if we move on into the sourcing piece of it, there's a supplier portal functionality that's included with services procurement. And so the requesters would fill out the request. It would get submitted and sourced to different providers. They would then submit their candidates. You can do interviews. You can make changes, and then as time goes on, obviously the service providers or service suppliers can agree to a particular candidate that you want to submit or they want to submit. Now, as far as sourcing candidates, as we saw before, you can have different competencies, but you can also ask specific questions. And these are some bid factors that we have, and bid factors are similar in our strategic sourcing module. But here we can ask different questions of our candidates beyond the base competencies that we're asking about. And here we can even provide some weighting. And that's going to help you in the end decide how are you going to compare one candidate against the next. As you bring on the different candidates and the different consultants, they're called services providers or service providers. And then you can keep a record of these individuals and where they're from, and obviously identify, are they eligible? So if we unchecked this box, then this particular service provider couldn't be used again on any future engagements because they're not eligible. part of the service engagement is there might be other things involved as opposed to just bringing that person on. And so this is just a task checklist that's included to say that when you onboard this person, you're going to have to maybe order them a new laptop, assign a badge, create their nameplate, that kind of set up their email, and those kinds of things. And there could be offboarding tasks at the end of the life of that particular workflow and work order engagement. So this allows you to make sure, allows you the ability to organize your work and how you're going to manage those individuals. And you can set up reminders to other people to participate. When the work order is created or when new candidates are submitted based on a particular rate, there's a function in purchasing called procurement contracts. And if you happen to have a procurement contract set up with a service supplier and there is a particular rate that you negotiated for any candidate they submit, you can set that up and the system will automatically check that for you. So if we look right here, a candidate was attempted to be submitted with a rate of $55 as opposed to the contract rate of $42.50. Or if I manually tried to enter a work order and I put in a rate that was higher than the $42.50, I would be warned as well. So you can really leverage that contract integration with purchasing. Now, as time goes on and the individual will submit what work they've done, they would fill out a timesheet. And the timesheets can be either they can be hourly or they could be based on deliverables and milestones and what they've completed. Your time cards could also afford your service providers to put time towards specific projects that they might be working on. So we could open up the chart field of accounts that's related to this work order, and they could put time against each one of those individually, but on the same timesheet. And then as we see here, they can even add expenses if that was part of if that was the timesheet format that you provided in this particular effort. When those timesheets are submitted, the time card, whether it's resource-based or deliverable-based, they can see a history of what they've done, the hours that they've put together. They can even see a little bit of a chart of what's going on, and it's submitted for approvals. And this is leveraging the approval workflow framework, which I hope all of you are using to some degree. And you can set up how you want your time cards to be routed, whether it's parallel, serial, multiple people per level, that kind of thing. This is the progress entry, whether if they're going to do things like milestone as opposed to resource-based. They indicate the activity, how many hours, what that rate is, and that can be that can turn into your timesheet as well. Now, when the process is that you've got your service providers, they enter the time, submit the timesheet. That time card will be reviewed by an approver, and if that approver accepts that timesheet, they would, and it matches up to the same timesheet and everything with the work order. That's essentially the match. We're not going to be doing a match later on in AP, okay? Now, once that draft or that time card is approved, we would then go to what's called create batch invoice. So we approve our invoice, then we run a process called create a batch invoice, all right? And that invoice can then go back to the supplier for them to approve, send back in, and then we can export that to payables through voucher billed. So you approve your invoices between you and the supplier, you create the batch invoice, and then we export that to payables. And then this shows you some unified integration as well, where we can see on this particular work order, we have our requisition that originated it. It actually leveraged a contract that had a service rate with that supplier. The work order was created. A voucher was generated after that export to payables, and then a payment was generated as well. So we keep track of all the transactions that go through. Now, as time goes on, supplier performance is being tracked You know, how is that service provider working for you? How is the service supplier in general working for you? And we give you some delivered interactive reports that you can use to look at things like service supplier performance. There's one for your different supplier ratings, how they're going to rate. And this is all available to you online within Services Procurement. Okay, so with that said, why don't we jump over to our demo. Okay, where I am right now actually is within the User Productivity Kit Developer. We're going to be walking through this vignette that'll take us through the full process flow. But I wanted to just touch on this little life cycle map here before we do that. Again, we're going to be filling out a requisition, which is the request for the engagement. We're then going to source that requisition to the appropriate service supplier, and then we'll procure, or rather onboard, that service provider to do work for us. And then as time goes by, that service provider is going to be entering in a timesheet. We run it through approvals, and then we're going to generate that draft invoice that gets approved, and then it exported to accounts payable, and that way we can do the settlement. And all along, all of that data is being captured so that we can do subsequent reporting. Now, something to keep in mind that as we go through this vignette, there is some back and forth because we're going to be changing hats more than a few times, but we'll go ahead and do that now. So I'm here in a 9.2 image 26 environment, and we're looking at a little bit of the fluid that's set up. And so here is our user. Her name is Tiffany Irving, and Tiffany has a buyer role, but she's going to fill out a requisition. So this requisition here, this is actually what e-procurement looks like. But in this centerpiece here, we see that there is a services procurement area, and we're going to order a resource. So when I click on resource, it's going to bring up all the service roles that are based on resource as opposed to a deliverable, like a database administrator or a developer or an assembly line worker, whatever. But we're just going to order one database administrator in our effort here. And when I click on add, that takes us to an area, let me expand that, that is going to give us more information. So this is the template, as it were, of that service engagement. So we can see the method is going to be resource-based. We have different service types and departments. And as far as the time reporting option, you can do actual allocation, which means that your service provider could drill in and put time towards specific chart of accounts or specific projects. Or we can do things like percent allocation, and that's what we're going to do here. And we'll keep moving along. So we could put in our scope of work, what we want this particular one to do. We could include attachments if we want. Here's that list of competencies we saw a little bit about before, where we want this person to have database design abilities, SQL, app server administration experience, how many years, what's the proficiency level we're looking for. There's also an action ability, and the action is kind of interesting in that if they try to submit a candidate that doesn't meet that action criteria, you could either block the candidate from being submitted, or you don't take any action at all, or at least just warn them to say that, hey, you're not submitting a candidate that meets this particular criteria. We can allow expenses, telecommuting. Do we want to have an interview? And the interview would have to, you would set up the interview and all the people that need to do the interview first. And until they all go through that interview process, you couldn't onboard someone yet. But then there's also the bid factors, and we click on scoring criteria. Here we can see those individual questions, right, that we want to ask about that particular candidate and looking for best or worst, because that's going to help us make our decision. Go back to our service request page. Scroll down. And here we can see, here's the duration information. What's our start and end date? How many days is that estimated to be? This is our distributions. Now, the way that we picked a percentage distribution, and we elected to do just 100% on each of these. I could add many more rows with chart fields and things to distribute that percentage if I want. It could even go across projects, that kind of thing as well. Now, if I go into the chart field here, we can see I could identify specific projects. And this is coming from project costing. Okay, so you can have that integration there. Because it may be that you're going to collect all the costs from the timesheets and the deliverables and then rebuild them, or at least just do your reporting to see how everything is going. Okay, so we've come down to and indicated, all right, who's going to be our service coordinator? Now, service coordinator means who's the person, who's your employee that's going to manage this service, bringing on this particular individual and the engagement, creating the work order, that kind of thing. You could have a team, or we could have individual ones, and that's all we've done here. We've selected Veronica Atkins. Okay, so that's the building of our requisition from a template, and we can see we have the line for our database administrator. That's what we're going to do. And I'm going to come down here and submit that. Now, that's going to go through different levels of approvals before it can be sourced. Okay, so let's go now into the Manage Requisitions component and see what happened. Now, just for the sake of time and whatnot, I didn't take us through the approvals of the requisition. As far as the sourcing is concerned, you can set up default sourcing rules to, let's say, send it to the top primary, service suppliers, or you could have a step in there where you can select which ones you want. But because this particular icon is activated, it's telling me that, okay, it's been sourced. And here we can see that it's been, the status is sourced, that requisition has gone out to the appropriate people for response. Okay. Now, we are going to log in as, we were just in as the service requester, and now we've logged in as our service coordinator, the person, your employee that's going to manage this. Now, she's got a tile set up for services procurement to this navigation collection we created. And it's all about services procurement. And if I come down here, there's the requisition that we just entered. It's been sourced. And if we come out here, we're being given a high-level view of that requisition that we just entered. You see the scope of work, the competencies, and here we can see that it's been sourced to these 4 primary service suppliers. And again, you can set that up as a default to just automatically send them approved requisitions, or you could stall it and you could have your service coordinators manually do that if you want, okay? But we just automated that. So what we're going to do now, since it's been sourced and sent to the supplier, we're going to log in, or we're going to log out first, but we're going to log in as our service supplier, one of the service suppliers that responded. And this gal's name is Carolyn Jordan. And she's got access to PeopleSoft in order to do this kind of thing. So she's going to click on her tile called Submit Bids, and she'll see a list right down here. She'll see a list of all the requisitions that she's been included on. And what she wants to do here is she wants to submit a bid. Now, when she looks at this, all right, here, once again, we're seeing another high-level view of this particular request. But when we come down here, we're going to want we have to indicate who is the service provider, the actual consultant we want to use. And in this case, we're using Nancy Abed. We'll indicate what our pay rate is. And then these are the bid factor questions. There's some more information that we want to know about it. Now, we can default some answers in here, the preferred answers. This is coming from the requisition itself. It can be overridden, of course. Are expenses included? No, we're not going to do that. She could even add attachments here, and that attachment might be her resume or any other information. But we're not going to do an interview in this particular vignette. So I'm going to submit that candidate as the service supplier. Okay, we're going to switch hats again, and we're going to log back in as our service coordinator, Veronica Atkins, who's going to retrieve that bid and see what it's all about. Come back into her system and click on her navigation, and we can go to the Assess and Award Bids area. Because we've already distributed the requisition, it would come time now to say, all right, we need a candidate, who are we going to onboard? And in this case, I can see that there's an incoming bid, and if I drill into this, I can see that one bid has come in. Now, just for the sake of this vignette, we're not going to have a bunch of different suppliers. Well, we would see each supplier that submitted someone, and then we can do the side-by-side. And for those of you that are familiar with PeopleSoft Strategic Sourcing, this should look familiar, same kind of thing, that allows you to do side-by-side analysis. And the bid factors are what's going to help you determine what the overall score is. Okay, so I'm going to come in now. That bid has been submitted, and we're going to review the candidate. I can see the pay rate. I can see all the what was responded to, and I think what I'm going to do here, we'll offer the position. But if we take a moment and see the different options that you've got, is we could right here we could indicate, well, you know, I think we want to do an interview. So we could schedule an interview. We could just reply to them, ask for more information, decline that candidate. They could resubmit another, or just end the communication entirely. You don't want to work with that supplier anymore. But we're going to offer the position to them, and we'll submit it. This is going to, once we submit it, that's going to send a note back to the service supplier to review and either accept or not. So we're going to log back in as the service supplier contact and review that offer. So we're going to go into her bid section, and we can see, oh, here's the requisition, and here's what she's, the action there was to offer the position to us. And we're going to accept that offer. And we'll submit that back. So yeah, there's some back and forth, and it looks like a lot because we're doing it all at once. But as you know, in regular real life, it wouldn't be quite so confusing, I think. So now we're going to log back in as our service coordinator, Veronica Atkins, and she can go back into Service Pro and go to her workbench to see what's out there. Sure enough, another bid has come in. Okay. And if she drills into that, she can see more information. Now, I'm sure a lot of questions are, can you get notified via email and that kind of thing? Of course, yes. So in this regard, she's looked at that candidate. She submitted the offer. She's going to fulfill the bid. Now, this part, because she's using an action to fulfill the bid, she's going to submit that, and that gives her the ability to create the center of the universe, right? The generate work order. Because the work order is what's going to track all the time and has all the criteria in it. So here we can see what that work order looks like. It's got 4 tabs: details, cost, what approvals and alerts, and the additional comments. It'll take the default number of the requisition unless you change it, but it does have its own work order ID. We can see the requisition that it came from, any comments included. Here's our service type, what it's all about, our competencies. It looks a lot like the requisition, actually. And we can see what our projected start, projected end, and now we want to put in what our actual date is. And then here's our service supplier and the service provider right here. So I'll go ahead and save that. And it's taking me over to the execute tasks. Remember, we can identify the additional activities that are part of onboarding and managing someone, like ordering the laptop, assigning the badge. You can have different people who this is assigned to, and they can be notified through right here, and then they can come in and make these changes as well. We'll just go ahead and execute all those and go back to our service detail. If we move to the cost tab, we can see what our pay rate is. And we do have to assign a template. Now, you would create what templates you want, things like weekly, no overtime, monthly, 24-hour, that kind of thing. So we're just going to apply this type of template, and they can only enter time based on that template. As far as approvals and alerts, here we can see that this work order is going to have a level of approvals on it as well. We ran the requisition through approvals and then sourced it. Well, if we would have came in directly to the work order and created it, we could have, we could have done that, of course, but that has its own level of approvals as well, so you can't just automatically create things. You can set workflow on a lot of different things. And we can see here some different alerts that are set up. Once we reach consumption of 90%, we want to send an alert to this particular distribution list. That way you're always having visibility to what's happening with each of these work orders. Okay, now there's integration with purchasing. Of course, that's primarily why we brought what services procurement is over in the financial supply chain databases. How can we track that service spend in the system? So here we're going to indicate what our PO numbers are, because we want to generate a separate purchase order, and that purchase order can be used in your spend calculation. You could send a copy of it to the service supplier, but you're not going to be using that to flip into invoices or anything like that. Okay. So we've saved that. We have our workflow, our work order now. Okay, now we're going to say that work order went through its approvals, it's active, it's good. And if you notice here, we're going to change hats again, and we're going to log in as Nancy Abed, and she's the consultant that's actually doing the work. And it's time for her now to enter a timesheet against that work order. So she's going to log in and go to Maintain Timesheets. She's going to find the work order that she's working against, and she'll create a new timesheet. And here she'll put in a few hours. She could add expenses. If this would have been an actual costing, she could have drilled in and applied time to different projects that are part of the same timesheet. And when she comes in here, she can say, all right, this is just a standard time category. This is the work order I'm working against. Here we can see who the approvers are, and she'll submit that timesheet. So she's not submitting a separate invoice. She's submitting a timesheet. And how that gets processed into an invoice is where we're going to be heading to next. All right, so we're going to log out, and we're going to log back in as the first approver of that timesheet. And again, we're using the approval workflow framework. So the supplier has entered the timesheet, she submitted it, and we're going to go into Tiffany Irving's approvals, and she can see, oh, there's a service timesheet. And this is using fluid approvals. And just a comment about fluid approvals, see all the different facets? These are all the different transactions that have an approval ready to be done. Once we do the services timesheet, if there isn't an approval there, you shouldn't see that anymore. So she can see this timesheet. If she wanted to view or go in and adjust it, she certainly could, but she'll go ahead and approve that. She can add comments if she wants and then submit. And as you can notice here, there aren't any more service timesheets because there was only one transaction. So that's fluid approvals. Let's go in as our second approver quickly. This is Betty Lockerty, and she also has just one service timesheet, but she does lots of approvals. She'll approve that and submit it. All good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to process that timesheet that's been approved into a draft invoice. That draft invoice then goes to the service supplier contact for their review. And if they approve it, they could make changes, but if they approve it and send it back, that's what we convert into a voucher. The service supplier is not going to send a separate invoice in this process. So what we do is we're going to create a batch invoice. And what that is going to do is we're going to convert our work order or any available work orders based on any criteria into that invoice. So once that invoice is run, and that can be done by a background process, we'll go ahead and submit that. Okay, so a draft invoice now has been created. So what's our next step? We have to go back in as the service supplier contact, Carolyn Jordan. And when she comes in, she's going to do a little different navigation. Goes through and use the navigator to service procurement, and she's going to approve service invoices. So here's an invoice that's come in. She can drill in and take a look at the detail. If you want to freeze the screen, go ahead and you can see what more information is there. And we could drill into the line. She can make changes or not. We're going to just approve it at a summary level here. And by approving this draft invoice, that means it's matched, essentially. Everything is good and go, and it can then move forward into becoming a voucher. Now, we're going to log out. We're back in as our service coordinator to finalize this settlement. So I'm in as the employee again. And what I need to do is, because we created the draft invoice from the timesheet, we sent that invoice to the supplier. They approved it, agreed, it's matched, approved, all good. Sent it back, and now we want to find that invoice and then run our process to export it to payables. Now, you could set another level of approvals in there if you want. That's up to you. After we export it to payables, that stages it for voucher build. And for those of you that work with AP, you should be familiar with that. Voucher build will pick up those service invoices and generate a voucher. Now, we're going to go over here to, this is a quick, this is using recent places. I was previously in accounts payable. And if we look at an existing value, I'm going to select any invoices that came in from services procurement. And if we click on that, sure enough, there's our invoice. And we can see that this invoice came from services procurement. Now it can go through additional approvals if you want. It's a no match because it came through services procurement, but then you can generate a payment from it as well. Now if we go back a little bit, we go into service work order. Let's drill into another work order just to show you. Here's the work order. This tab, a work order that's been created, this tab will show up called consumption. And the idea is that it's going to have your, it's going to keep track of what's been totally consumed on that work order. Scroll down a little bit. You can see what's consumed on the work order, what's the total consumed, what's remaining on it, any of that might be billable amounts. So this is where you really can keep track of what's going on with that particular work order. And we can see here, here's our invoice that was processed. There was another invoice that might be out there. And these are the associated time cards. Okay. So that's a full, simple full process of services procurement that will take you, that will allow you to manage your service providers and be able to work with your service suppliers, but keep it all part of the financials and supply chain spend for procurement. So I hope this gives you a good flavor for how services procurement works. And if you would like a PDF copy of this, then please make a comment on the website, and it should come to me in your email, and I can send one out for you. So thank you very much for your attendance, and most of all, thank you for your business with PeopleSoft and Oracle.